Hello, hello, hello. Is this on? You guys hear me okay? All right. So let's get started. It is my pleasure to introduce Mandy Pennington. She is a writer, marketer, and teacher with a passion for storytelling and 10 plus years of experience helping others succeed in the digital space. She is director of digital strategy at Wilkes University and an adjunct instructor in communications at both Marywood, woo, go Pacers, and Wilkes University. She co-founded NEPA BlogCon, Northeastern Pennsylvania's first blogging and social media conference. I went, it's super fun. And Squirrel Girls Tech Camp, a STEM initiative for girls in grades 4 through 6. Mandy enjoys performing in local theater and lives in Scranton with her husband, Brent, and 2 mischievous cats. Take it away, Mandy.
Thank you, Catherine. Hi, everyone. How are we doing? Welcome. Hi. So, organizational communication is not the most exciting topic, but my hope is that you're going to leave today's session with some practical tips that you can apply not only in your work and in your professional career, but also in the classroom. Many of you are still in high school, so you're going to have the opportunity to work in groups, I assume. You're going to have group projects. You're going to be part of organizations where you might have to collaborate in order to be able to solve a problem. My goal today is to give you some tips and tools that you can use to become a better communicator. So let's kick it off. Today's session is called "This Meeting Should Have Been an Email," which I'm sure is a sentiment that you all have experienced. You have all been in a situation where you were brought together to learn something or to solve a problem or to discuss something, and the way that it was handled was not good, right? So here are some stories that you might have heard or can relate to. Their inbox is like a black hole. I send something and I know I'm never going to hear back. I have 110 unread emails, 110. I have no idea what we spent the last 30 minutes talking about. I'm seeing a lot of head nods on that one. I never know how I'm doing at work. Do they like me, or am I going to get fired? I have asked a question, and I got back a whole bunch of information that I really don't understand, and I'm afraid to ask for clarification. I don't want to look stupid. And finally, no one knows what's going on. These are the sentiments that you have probably encountered in the organizational communication situations you've already found yourself in, being part of a team, working in any kind of job, or collaborating on a project. So why are we so bad at this? Why are we so bad at communication? The truth of the matter is that not everyone has had the opportunity to practice these skills. And most of the time, when we're thinking about what we learn about our professions, we're very focused on skill building, trying to learn the essential skills to do our jobs. But we don't always learn and practice how do we get really good at communicating things in our jobs. So my goal today is to give you this opportunity. Communication is hard. It takes a lot of practice to get good at, and it also takes practice to get comfortable with. So no matter what you hear in today's presentation, the first thing that you should walk away knowing is that communication is something you have to claim the right to do. You have to be able to practice it and get comfortable with it in order to be successful with it. So let's get better at this together. The first thing I'm going to tell you is to communicate with intention, and this is something that I see all the time in professional situations. No one knows what is going on. No one knows what the purpose is or what direction that we're moving in. I think every organization at one point or another has found themselves feeling this way, where they don't know where things are headed and they feel really uncertain. So the first thing that you could do is to know your goals beforehand when you communicate. If you're starting your own company, if you're going to be an entrepreneur, that means having a clear vision of what you are doing and why. If you are running a project, know what your outcome is and what the thing is that you want to achieve. If you're trying to get something that you need, know what that is ahead of time so that we can ask for the things that we need in the right way. Start off with a goal of some kind. Know what your end goal is for the communication. Because when we have a goal and everyone is headed in the same direction and to the same destination, it's much easier to get alignment. It's easier to get people to listen to you, to buy into it, or to give you what you need. So you have to start with a goal and be able to communicate intentionally, knowing that you're trying to get to a destination. It's also a whole lot easier to work from a destination and go backwards than to try and draw a map from scratch without knowing where you're going. Most people, when they're trying to build a company for the first time, they have an idea of the problem that they want to solve, but they can't really articulate this. They can't really understand what is the story that I'm trying to tell, what is the destination I'm trying to get everyone to. So spend some time up front clearing that up for yourself so that way you can communicate it to your customers, you can communicate it to your team members, people you collaborate with your vendors, and with anyone else you might encounter. The second tip for success is to find communication channels that work. And this often takes a lot of trial and error. Organizations will try lots of different methods to get the word out, depending upon what the message is. Now, the first thing to know is that not every message is ideal for every medium. There are some things that just don't belong in an email, or probably don't need to be a meeting. So we'll tackle that first one. What's not good for an email? So any information that's complex, where you want to give people the opportunity to give you feedback, is ideal for an in-person meeting. So if you are working on a project that's really complex, has a lot of moving pieces, and maybe you need to bring a lot of people together to, again, get in alignment or make sure that everybody understands what they're doing and have the opportunity to give feedback on that, bring people together for an in-person meeting. Short transactional things are best for an email. You don't need to call a meeting to know when the next meeting is. You don't need to call a meeting to be able to share out a document, unless it's a really complex one that's going to involve collaboration. So the best types of messages that do well for email or sending out on a chat or via text message are usually things that are transactional, very simple, easy to remember things that don't really ask a lot of you. But if you do need to bring people together, make sure that it's for a complex reason, something that usually needs to have feedback involved. The second thing is to know that you're going to need more than one communication method. Any organization will tell you that this is always the biggest challenge, is making sure that the employees or the members of that organization hear you. So know up front that you're going to have to use multiple communication methods in order to be able to get your message out. So if you're changing a policy or you have a new procedure or something really cool that your organization has done and you want everyone to know about it, you're probably going to have to do an email, you're probably going to have to do an in-person meeting, you're probably going to have to put it out on social media, you might have to hold internal one-on-ones with your team members. Know up front that no matter what your message is, you're going to need more than one way to communicate it, because we receive in a single day thousands of messages. These are subconscious messages from brands. These are things that we see in terms of just browsing the internet. Most of us do our jobs on computers, so we're going to see emails, we're going to see news stories, we might see ads. You might have conversations that happen around you in your work area, people who talk to you about maybe, what's going on in terms of the weather or maybe what happened in the game last night. You're receiving thousands of pieces of communication in a day. That's a lot of information to try and process. So you have to understand that having multiple methods of communication to get your message out is the best thing that you can do as an organizational communicator, because otherwise we're overwhelmed. We're overwhelmed. We need more than one touch point in order to be able to get what we need. And finally, make sure that you're considering the who, what, when, where, why, and how of your communication. Not every message is ideal to send at 4 o'clock on a Friday, when people are usually checked out and they're getting ready for the weekend. So if it's super important, probably don't send it then. It's probably something that you want to make sure that you send when people are really engaged. If this is something that is complex and maybe requires a lot of discussion, try to communicate it out in advance ahead of time as much as possible so that there's opportunities for people to give you that necessary feedback. Bless you. You also want to make sure that you're considering who is the recipient of your message. So the things that you might say to the people you work with might be very different than what you say to your customers. So consider the language that you use and try to make sure that you're being clear and speaking directly to that audience. Practicing empathy. This is something that really ties into this morning's keynote in terms of practicing emotional intelligence. Empathy is probably one of the most valuable skills that you can have as a professional. The ability to be able to put yourself in someone else's shoes and relate to them. So when practicing empathy, as a communicator, it's important to really consider how your words may affect others. I always recommend that if you're trying to draft a professional communication that's going to go to everyone in your company, you read it out loud. And you try to understand what are the words that you're using and how that might be received by someone. Are there areas of confusion? Could things get confusing for people? Could those words be interpreted in different ways? You have to actually make room for that assumption, that things might not be heard the way that you want them to be heard. So take the time to actually consider how might this message be interpreted and try to be as clear as possible. Now, open, empathetic communication builds trust, which is ultimately what everyone wants to be able to do in an organization. You want to trust your employees, your teammates, your customers. Everyone wants to feel good about working together. And having empathetic communication, being able to relate to someone and understand how that message might be received and how they might feel, helps to ultimately build trust. Now, before going into any kind of conversation, whether it's a meeting with someone or sending out some kind of communication to your audiences or even internally, you want to actually practice that message so that you feel really comfortable with it, and again, so that you could try to identify those pitfalls before they happen. Confusion and miscommunication is really, really easy to fall into, especially if stuff is changing, right? Nobody likes change. Change is a scary thing. So in an organization where you're trying to navigate change, the best thing to do is to be transparent, to be clear, and to be consistent in your messaging. The more you can do that, the more you can put people's minds at ease. A great tip to think about in terms of empathetic communication when you're trying to put yourself in someone else's shoes is to use confirming language to show active listening. So if someone is telling you something, you could repeat back to them, "I'm hearing that blank." You're confirming what you're hearing from them, and you're also confirming that how you're receiving their message is consistent with what they intended. And you should try to encourage the same thing of the people that you communicate with, and ask them, are you receiving it this way? Or do you understand this? Do you have questions? Can I clarify this for you? Using affirming language like "I'm hearing this from you" ensures that miscommunication isn't as easy to fall into. And it also shows that you're actively listening to people, which is what we all want. There's nothing more painful than when you're in a meeting or trying to talk to someone and you could clearly tell that they're not listening. That makes us feel really crappy, right? It doesn't feel good. So try to use empathetic listening and responses to be able to build that trust and encourage more communication. The fourth thing to do is to read it out loud. This is a tip that is good for anything that's written, is to actually take the time to read whatever it is out loud. This helps you, number one, look for things like spelling errors, typos, grammatical issues, but it also helps you see whether or not your message is actually clear. Most organizations fall into the trap of trying to be correct instead of clear, meaning they use internal jargon, they're going to use slang that maybe people don't understand, maybe they make things too complex. They write in legalese where it's written like maybe a contract would be written instead of what a person would read. So reading it out loud is a great way to be able to check yourself to see whether or not what you're putting out there is actually understandable, or if it's something that's going to probably cause a miscommunication or a problem. I always say that clarity is better over correctness, and try to be as simple as possible. It is one thing to put a link in an email that says, "Click here to please download this file," or it says, "Download this file." There's two different things, but again, be simple. Look at ways to be really clear and distill down your language to only the essential pieces because it eliminates confusion. And avoid overload. This was a thing that I had to learn as a new professional coming into the field. I was so used to how academic papers were written that when I first started drafting emails, I treated it like it was a dissertation. It's like, okay, I need to have an introduction, I need to have a body, and then I need to have a conclusion. You don't need that in an email. So what this means is that you have to be really efficient with how you communicate and think about how do you avoid overloading your recipient with too much. If you have a lot of information to communicate, ask yourself, is this really something that belongs in an email? Or do I need to have a meeting where maybe people can talk about this to process it? Or can I have a series of messages that go out so I could break it down into smaller pieces? These are small, simple actions that can easily clear up a lot of confusion. Number 5 is to treat meetings like a project. There is nothing worse than walking into a meeting and everyone looks at each other and is like, "So, what are we going to talk about? Huh? How's everybody's day?" There's not really any kind of clear message as to what you're supposed to be there for. People get really nervous too when they get a meeting invite on their calendar and it doesn't say what it's for, because automatically everybody starts to panic, right? Everyone's like, "Oh no, I'm getting fired because there's nothing in the email that tells me what this meeting is about." So, in order to put people's minds at ease and also make meetings go better, you should treat them like a project. What this means is that you start off with having an agenda. Have a clear agenda before you start the meeting as to what you want to talk about and what you want your outcomes to be. Put that in your email invitation to the meeting so that people don't freak out, and also so that you can communicate your expectations ahead of time. It's really good when you're setting a meeting to have a time limit. Most of meetings don't really need to be the full hour that they get blocked off for. So you can ask yourself, is this really like a 15-minute meeting that's really quick and really simple, or is this something that maybe I need 30 minutes for? If it is really complex, maybe an hour makes sense, but try to set a definitive time limit so that people can understand and plan their day around your meeting, and also so that you can be efficient with your time and how you use it. Take notes. This is one of the things that I see a lot of young professionals struggle with when they initially start, is that they come to meetings and they don't have anything with them to take notes. Or they are afraid to take notes because they're not really sure what they need to take notes for. So take the stress out of it. Appoint one person in your meeting to be a scribe, to take notes for everyone. This was one of the best things that I learned in one of my previous jobs, is anytime we had a team meeting, somebody was assigned as the scribe. It rotated, so everybody had the opportunity to take notes, and then share out those notes after the meeting. It's a really great way to be able to make sure that everybody's on the same page and that everybody also has the same information. So try to take notes and make sure that when you actually conduct your meeting, after you've shared your information or discussed a problem or whatever it might be, that you're actually listing out action steps, things that need to happen next in order for things to get accomplished. Assign them to people. Say, okay, Tom, you're responsible for this, and here's the deadline that it needs to be done by. Or, hey, Sally, this is what I really need you to follow up on. Can you make sure that this is done by this date? Having clear action items and next steps makes sure that your meetings don't fall dead in the water, because that happens all too often, where you leave a meeting having discussed a bunch of stuff, you generate a lot of ideas, and then nothing happens. And that's super frustrating when nothing happens. You don't feel like you're getting work done, or maybe a project that's really important to you stalls. So set action items. Make sure that your action items are documented. Follow up with an email to everybody that says, okay, here are the action items that we talked about, here's when they're due, here's who's doing them. Something that simple can go a long way in making sure that things actually get done. And that goes into that final point, which is to document and follow up. Meetings are most successful when everyone has the same information. But we know that not everyone is listening in a meeting, right? Sometimes we tune out. Maybe there's other things on our mind. We're having a day, like we all have had a day, where you're not present. So actually having things written down and shared out, documented, make sure that everybody can go back to the same information. And make sure that everyone is aligned on what the key purposes were, or the things that were given as takeaways. Whatever it is, it helps to account for the fact that we are human beings and our attention span is not infinite. So make it easy on yourself. Take the time to document it. Write stuff down and send it out. A recap goes a long way. Number 6, get comfortable with feedback. This is probably the thing that is most difficult, especially when you're in early career, because you're so nervous about everything. You're so scared. You're so scared to ask about how things are going, how things are doing. You're afraid of being judged. You're afraid of people assuming things about you, and you approach work with a sense of defensiveness. It's scary, right? So the first thing that you have to do is to learn how to receive feedback, right? So you have to learn how to be good at receiving feedback. And usually for that, it starts off by listening. Practicing engaged, active listening when somebody wants to tell you, hey, this is how this is going, or here's what I think you need to improve on. The second thing that you can do in terms of receiving good feedback is to ask clarifying questions. If you don't understand what someone is asking of you, ask them to clarify. They want to make sure that you get it right. They want to be able to help you achieve whatever it is that you need to achieve. So ask those questions. Don't take things personal. Most feedback is usually focused on behavior and not your personality. So just take that into account, because it's really hard to go from 0 to 1,000 in terms of defensiveness when you're receiving feedback. Try not to take it personal. Bring yourself back down to earth. Take a deep breath when you go into a meeting with a boss or with someone who's trying to give you feedback on something, and just receive it. Take it in. Listen to it. And thank the person who is offering feedback to you, because it encourages dialogue. It encourages that feedback loop that is so important for making sure that information gets communicated throughout multiple levels of your organization, and to make sure that you feel comfortable to be able to give feedback to that person. Now, when it comes to giving feedback, when you are asked, hey, what do you think? The first thing that you need to think about is, how do I clearly communicate my thoughts? I am a big fan of practicing this in advance. If you know that you're going to have a feedback opportunity, practice your answers. You can make notes for yourself, you could write things down, and just practice getting really comfortable about how to clearly and succinctly communicate what it is that you think and feel. Be very specific and descriptive in your feedback. It's really hard to improve something when the feedback is vague. Like if they're just like, oh, be better. That's not helpful, right? It's not helpful to be like, just be better. So you have to think about what are specific and descriptive things that you can use in your feedback that are actually actionable for the other person. Make sure you ask others if they're comfortable receiving your feedback in that moment, right? So this is, again, practicing empathy. As I mentioned, we all have days, right? There are moments that you're going to encounter professionally where you're going to be super stressed out. Maybe there's something going on in your life outside of work that's really challenging. You have to make time to actually ask that question, are you open to my feedback right now? And if they say no, that's okay. There can be another time that you can give them feedback. The same thing is said for you. The giver of feedback to you should ask you, hey, are you open to receiving this feedback? If you're not, try to set up a time that is appropriate. And make sure that this cycle of feedback where you're giving and receiving is a regular occurrence. This is where communication breakdowns happen most often in organizations, is they don't make regular time to tell people, hey, this is how you're doing, or they don't give people the chance to say, hey, this is what's going wrong. So you have to make regular commitments to feedback in order for it to be successful. And finally, take a proactive stance to it. I will tell you all right now that the most important thing that you can do as a communicator is to claim the right to dialogue. Claim the right to have a conversation, to be able to ask questions, to be able to ask for feedback on how things are going, to be able to offer up your opinions. Because ultimately, that's what you're there to do as part of an organization. Everyone has different skills, different experiences, different insights, different knowledge that they bring to the table. Your job as a member of that organization is to share that. So try to foster it by claiming the right to dialogue. Be open to talking to other people, even people you might not work with very often. Be open to asking for feedback. Be open to giving feedback to others. And again, you're going to have to practice it in order to be able to get comfortable with it. Number 7 is to fall in love with follow-through. This is where most people fail in sales situations, and it's also where most people fail in communication situations. Now, follow-through is all about making sure that whatever you make a commitment to do actually gets done. So I will suggest to you first that it's okay to be a nudge. It is okay to be the person who's like, hey, you told me you were going to get me this, and I haven't received it yet. Can we talk about when that's going to happen? Or, hi, so in the last meeting you said you were going to do this, and I'm just wondering when this might get done. It's okay to follow up and ask questions and to ask for what you need, right? There is nothing more frustrating when you're part of a team than being held up by somebody else's delay. So it's okay to ask. It's okay to follow up and be like, hey, I need something from you. Could you help me out? Commitments that are kept help to build trust in your organization. If you are the kind of person who makes a commitment and doesn't follow through, it's going to make it really hard for you to build trusted relationships with your coworkers. It's going to make it also really hard for you to be respected in your organization. So if you make a commitment to do something, try to follow through on it. And if you can't follow through on it, try to redefine the expectations so that you can, which we'll talk about when we talk about mistakes. But when you talk about commitment, it's about building trust and showing consistency. And the more consistent you can be, the better it is for your organization as a whole, because people know that they can rely on you to get things done. And they're going to come to you for those types of things. So it opens up a whole world of opportunity. And make follow-through easy for yourself. I'm going to give you 3 tools that you already have in your toolbox and have access to that you could do to make follow-up easy. The first is to look at scheduled emails. So you all probably have used Gmail before, I assume? Yes, pretty much everybody has used Gmail. There's a schedule send feature within Gmail where you can schedule when an email sends. Draft a message after you have a meeting with the follow-ups and send everybody a reminder after so many days. It's really easy to do follow-up that way. Schedule an email. Do it right after the meeting, and then you don't have to think about it. You don't have to remember it. The second tool in your toolbox is calendar reminders. Put things on your calendar. Put alarms for yourself in your phone. to remember to do things to follow up. So that way, again, you're taking some of that mental load off of yourself to just remember these things. Set it right when it happens. And then finally, putting due dates in meeting agendas is a really easy way to be able to facilitate follow-up. If you tell people when you expect things from them, in addition to what is expected, they're much more likely to follow through. And that's going to be better for you too. Own your mistakes. This is also one of the hardest parts of being a professional, is when you screw up. And everybody does. We're all human beings. We're not completely infallible. We make mistakes. So in order to be a better organizational communicator, when you make a mistake in something, first, acknowledge that mistakes happen. Everyone who has been to work knows that they will happen. Something doesn't get sent, a bill doesn't get paid, something doesn't get done on time, somebody says something that probably shouldn't have been said. Mistakes happen. The first thing that you have to do is to be prompt in your response. The longer a mistake goes unaddressed, the more that it snowballs and the worse that it gets. So you need to try to make sure that you're prompt in your response. If you can get ahead of it, that makes it all the easier to deal with. Transparency matters. Don't hide your mistakes. It's going to be really scary when the first time you make them. You're going to be like, oh my God, am I going to get fired for this? You might feel really nervous. Am I going to be judged? Are people going to think I suck? There's going to be all kinds of things going through your head the first time you make a professional mistake, or the first time you drop the ball on something. So just be transparent. Acknowledge, yes, this happened. And then try to chart a way forward. Look at solutions that can help bring the thing back on track when you make a mistake. It's going to make everybody feel more at ease. And again, this is all about building those trusted relationships that help to make communication successful. So try to find a way forward. Look at solutions and be like, yes, I messed up. How do we fix this together? There's nothing worse than an issue in an organization getting stuck because everybody wants to play the blame game. Everyone wants to be like, oh, well, this person messed up. The goal is to try to move forward from it, to learn from it and make sure that it doesn't happen again. Build in margin. This is another tool that you can use to be a better communicator. And what I mean by margin is building in a buffer. Ask for more time than you need on a project, because ultimately, stuff is going to happen. There will be snowstorms, you will get sick, there will be no internet in the building, stuff happens. Stuff happens, and sometimes time gets lost. So you need to ask for more time than you need. That way, you can set things up in your schedule and in your calendar and in your workload so that you can get things done before they're actually due, and you don't feel like you're scrambling until it's the last minute. Always anticipate delays and know that no matter what it is you're making a commitment to, something will probably come up. So build in a margin. If you think, okay, I need to do this, it needs to get done by Thursday, say, okay, I have until Wednesday to do it, because you give yourself an extra day in case something comes up. Or you can be like, hey, I know that this is something that's really important and it's going to cause a lot of confusion if it doesn't get done, and it's going to involve a lot of people. Let's set up some milestones so that way things get worked on gradually instead of all at once. So that way you're building in, again, that buffer to be able to clear up confusion, make sure that everybody's doing their part, and so that you don't get held up. Have a buffer in terms of your schedule. Y'all need to eat, sleep. You all need to go for a walk sometimes. So when you think about how you plan your day or how you're managing your work-life balance, build in margin to be able to live. Don't say, yes, I'm going to commit to doing all these things and I'm going to do them all right now, because it's not realistic and it's a path to burnout. So build in margin in your schedule in terms of how you structure your workday. It's going to make you a better communicator because you're going to disappoint people less, right? If you just continuously keep missing the mark because you're overstretched and you're running ragged, that's going to frustrate people, and it doesn't feel good for you either. So build in margin. And finally, make a plan B and C. If COVID has taught us anything, is that the world can change on a dime. Your day can change on a dime. So make sure that you're planning for plan B and plan C when you're trying to think about solutions to a problem. Have backup plans. They will serve you well. Finally, the tip I will leave you with is to keep learning. Communication is something that is a skill. It must be developed the same way that a muscle would. You have to exercise it. You have to practice it. You have to work at trying to develop this skill set. And it takes time. So I would encourage you to practice. Find ways to have mock conversations with your friends. I know it might sound really stupid, but honestly, it could be really helpful. I can tell you that professionally, this is something that I've done many times, is having a mock meeting to be able to navigate or anticipate questions or challenges. Communication, again, is just as important as all of your other job skills. So know that no matter what you choose to do, whether you want to start a company or you want to work in a company or you want to partner with a nonprofit, communication is going to be a skill that you're going to use no matter what. Pay attention to the communication around you. Sometimes being a great communicator starts with a simple thing like listening. So just take the time to listen. Listen to the conversations happening around you. What are the pitfalls? What are the things that are going great? And what are the things that are really awful? Try to avoid those things. It's really that easy. And then finally, find the fun. Work is hard. Work is hard. School is hard. Professional achievement is hard. So look for opportunities to find fun, because ultimately that will help you with building better relationships, and it makes communication a lot less scary. So thank you all for your time and attention. Any questions?
So I was wondering, how do you get over the fear of failing and making a mistake?
That's a really great question.
don't.
I think the first thing is claim the right to fail, because everyone will make a mistake. You have to acknowledge that you are not the only person on this planet who will make a mistake. It happens. And I think when you claim the right to make a mistake, to say that you're not going to be perfect, I think it lessens the impact that making a mistake actually has. I'm a perfectionist. I'm a person who, very type A. I go over, before this presentation, I was in here studying my slides. I made notes for myself. That's the kind of person I am. But I also know that sometimes I flub lines, or I forget things, or there's things that I wish I could have mentioned and I didn't have the opportunity to. So I honestly think that sometimes you have to just claim the right to fail, because sometimes it's just going to happen. And when you say, okay, this is going to happen, and you take a radical acceptance approach to it, it makes it much less scary.
Yes. Make sure our people virtually can hear you.
What are some tips to stay organized during meetings?
That's a great question. Taking notes is number one, the best thing that you can do to stay organized, because when you're in a meeting, conversation will sometimes flow in lots of different directions. So having a written document, it doesn't have to be a word-for-word transcript, but just having some notes on what got talked about can be really helpful in helping you to be able to respond and organize your own thoughts. Because sometimes in the moment, it's really hard to follow the conversation, but if you can look at it on paper, it helps to bring things back in check. I also think that, again, turning to that agenda is so important. If you can structure your conversation a little bit, it makes it easier on everyone. Because again, there's nothing worse than walking into a situation, it's like, what do we talk about? That's stressful for everybody, and you don't want to do that. So I would say go in with an agenda, take notes, and I also think that you can be the person in that meeting to steer things back on track if they try to go off the rails, right? So I think that that's one thing that we could also do as communicators, is if we see things going off track, we can always raise our hand and be like, so this is on the agenda, can we make sure that this gets covered? And that can sometimes bring things back. Does that help to answer your question?
I think you made a good point before, too. Everyone here has phones. So maybe do you have some recommendations on apps that have been lifesavers for you?
I live by my calendar, honestly. Google Calendar, I live by. I set reminders for myself for things I have to do. I use focus blocks in my calendar, so I actually block off time in my calendar so that nobody can schedule a meeting with me, because I know that that's going to be the time that I'm going to actually get stuff done. I also do the same thing for my meals. So if I have a lunch break, I make sure that it's blocked off in my calendar so that people don't schedule over me eating. I'm not going to be productive if I don't eat. So I have to be really protective of my time, because there's usually a lot of things competing for it. So I live by my calendar. Project management apps like Asana, which is a tool that you mentioned in your session this morning, are huge for team collaboration, because it helps you see all of the moving pieces of your project, and you can see how other people are working and fulfilling their own deadlines. So it can help you understand if a project is going off track pretty easily. Those are some of the tools that I would recommend to at least start with. But everybody's different. Some people are list people. How many of you are list people? You make lists, right? I make lists too. So if lists work for you, awesome. If you are somebody who lives by Post-its, you might really like Google Keep for keeping yourself organized. Google Keep is another app. It's awesome. And again, it's another way for you to be able to take and dump your brain into something so you don't have to try to remember it all, because I think that's probably where most of us fail, right? Is we try to remember absolutely everything. We can't. We receive thousands of messages in a day. We can't. Make it easy on yourself. You can use an app. No one's going to judge you.
I think you brought up something else too in writing emails of, try to avoid mistakes and typos and things like that. And I think that's some of the biggest things I see even from students. What is something that you could recommend that would help people curtail that and not have to fail as soon?
You have spell check built in. Use it. I would also say, again, read it out loud. Read it before you send. Read it before you send. I think a lot of times when we email reflexively, where we get something and we feel like, oh, I have to respond right now. And then you get really nervous if you don't. So take a minute, breathe, read it, and then process it, and then send. Give yourself that, again, give yourself margin, give yourself a buffer. What else?
Don, you came in at the right time. We're just rounding out our question session. My mic doesn't work. No. We were just asking about apps that can help with being a better communicator. Mandy had some really great suggestions.
How many of you use Grammarly?
I was just gonna say, yes, Grammarly's a lifesaver.
Grammarly and Hemingway are two of my favorite writing tools if you're looking to get better at being a clear and concise writer. So definitely run your stuff before you send it through Grammarly or Hemingway as a way to be able to pick up errors that maybe your spell check doesn't.
How many people in here are working on group projects or have worked on group projects in school? Yeah, a lot of people. So what is a tip that you would give to communicate best with your group and your project and keep everyone on the same page? Because someone's there's always that person's really checked out and not
Yes.
pulling their weight in the group.
Yes, I would say that assigning roles is probably the first thing that would benefit you in working in a group situation. Organizations that go through strategic changes, like maybe they grow really fast or maybe they're going through a really hard economic time, they usually see the most pain when they do not clearly have processes in place to be able to handle change. And that part of that is setting roles. So making sure that everybody understands what their contribution needs to be and what's expected of them. So you have to start off group projects by making those really clear. What does everybody need to do? When does it have to be done by? If you have a group leader, who is that person? When are you going to meet? If people do not fulfill up on their expectations, that's the other really hard part, and I'm sure you all have encountered that too, where you all are in a group project, you agree to all of these things, and then somebody inevitably doesn't do the work. Having expectations defined up front helps to mitigate that, because you can always turn back to that person and be like, hey, this didn't work out. Why? You can have the uncomfortable conversation then, and you can try to, rescue the project. But I would say assign roles early, assign expectations early. Because otherwise, again, it's just like showing up to a meeting where it's like, what does everybody want to talk about?
Any last questions? She's a wealth of information, guys. She's wonderful. Thanks so much, Mandy.
Thank you. Thank you. Awesome. Everybody, I work at Wilkes University, so if you have any questions about Wilkes, I would love to talk to you about it. In the meantime, there is swag on all of your chairs. Please take it. I don't want any left over.